book, we can imagine, was written in the 3rd or 4th century because we have testimony to it from church fathers from the 4th century. And it speaks of a people who are concerned about their faith because they're being challenged on the basis of, who was this figure who you say died and was resurrected? Was Jesus not the son of a harlot? Was he not the product of fornication? And these sorts of charges that we do know were circulating about Jesus at this time.
It is the second part of Nicodemus that tells the story of Jesus' descent into hell.
And while Satan and the prince of hell were discoursing each other, on a sudden there was a voice as of thunder and the rushing of winds, saying, Lift up your gates, O ye princes, and be ye lift up, O everlasting gates, and the King of glory shall come in.
For Nicodemus, the underworld is not the hell we might imagine today, but simply the destination for anyone who dies.
In the descent into hell, he tells not only of Jesus going down into hell and setting free the patriarchs we might expect, again, Adam, Isaiah, Abraham, but also of having set free some people who are walking around.
It's not a place of suffering, it's a place where the virtuous dead of the Old Testament, the prophets, somebody like Isaiah, where are they? They're not in hell, they're down there sleeping. So the idea is that Jesus goes down and brings with him all the righteous who have died before him, especially the martyrs. And it's a very beautiful, mythological idea. But the resurrection is a sort of a communal event to restore justice where injustice has been practiced.
Some 4th century church leaders believed this gospel was personally written by Nicodemus.
Nicodemus, as a matter of fact, a Greek word for one who is victorious for the people, was, according to Scripture, called a ruler of the Jews, meaning that he occupied a seat in the Supreme Jewish Council called the Sanhedrin. He was certainly a follower of Jesus.
Others claimed the Gospel of Nicodemus was a forgery. They believed that well-meaning Christian writers literally created documents meant to gain converts by impressing them with the Savior's power over Satan.
I don't think it intends to deceive anyone, because when it appeared, people would have known where has it been for the last few hundred years. So it's simply a way of telling the story of the Passion of Jesus, adding in all sorts of edifying details.
Even though the book was not included in the Christian canon, it exerted a profound influence on Christianity. Perhaps part of the reason was its telling of Jesus' final journey to the cross.
The fact that Luke does not mention Jesus meeting his mother on the way towards the cross really probably disturbed some of these early communities, and they wanted Mary to be there. So a creative genius within the community, if you consider these writings to be done by a genius, put her in there. And then, of course, this eventually develops into the Stations of the Cross much later. And that would be an important one on the way to the cross because of the mention of the holy women.
We know that in the 5th century in Jerusalem, pilgrims stopped at the place where they believed Pilate's trial of Jesus had occurred. And there's some thought that that may in fact be connected to this book, to the Gospel of Nicodemus.
But why was the Gospel of Nicodemus not included in the Holy Bible?
Well, the Gospel of Nicodemus didn't make the cut into the canon for a couple of different reasons. First of all, the second half probably wasn't written prior to the creation of the canon, the descent into hell part. The first half, the story of the trial of Jesus, also doesn't seem to have been discussed that much in the 3rd and 4th century by the sorts of people who were putting together canons. Probably because they saw it as very new, very recent, and therefore not even worthy of serious discussion for inclusion in the canon.
This is another case of a book being written too late, in a sense. You know that this story can't possibly be true. It's a corroboration of all of these other stories that are on the ground at the time. This can't possibly be a story that's written by an eyewitness. So in a sense, this is not a valid resource.
It is also possible that a story of Jesus in the underworld was too speculative or too disturbing for early Christian leaders. But why was this story so important to many early Christians?
This is an important story partially because you have certain parts of the Christian community saying there is no hell. Hell doesn't exist. Hell is like the state that you live in.
Perhaps the Gospel of Nicodemus was popular in early Christianity because it suggested that heaven and hell exist here and now on earth.
It is a holy tradition of the church to say that Jesus descended into the pit of despair, into the pit of darkness. Because what is hell? Hell is distance from God. Hell is being outside of the light and the love of God.
Next, an apocalyptic writing that almost became the final chapter in the New Testament.
When the day of God comes, all the children of men from the east unto the west shall be gathered before my Father, whoever lives. And he will command hell to open its bars of steel, and to give up all that is in it.
The Apocalypse of Peter was one of many apocalyptic writings popular with early Christians. It was almost included in the Bible, but the Revelation of John was chosen instead. Why was Peter's Apocalypse such a hot contender? And why was John's Apocalypse, the book of Revelation, chosen instead?
More people felt that John may have actually been written by an early disciple or apostle of Jesus. By the 4th century, most people were convinced that the Apocalypse of Peter was not actually the product of Peter's hand. That, and I would also suggest that the Revelation of John is a more finely wrought book. It's simply a better piece of literature. And the Apocalypse of Peter is more of a cobbling together of other people's visions, and it's less original, less finely wrought, and in some sense less beautiful.
In the first 3 centuries after the execution of Jesus, the Romans were torturing and executing not only Christians and Jews, but all those they believed to be enemies of their empire. It was during these days that tales of the end times, called apocalyptic writings, began to appear.
The word apocalypse is a Greek word that means unveiling or revelation. And an apocalypse is actually an unveiling of heavenly secrets in its theological definition. It's God opening heaven to reveal something.
Apocalyptic writings were suppressed by the authorities because symbolically they presented dangerous ideas, like the defeat of imperial tyrannies such as the Roman Empire.
And the revelation usually is about how soon is the end of the evil age that is all around us, this age of injustice and impurity and violence. It's not about the end of the world as we use the expression, it's about the end of evil. How long, O Lord, will it go on? God will overcome someday, but how soon?
We often see people writing apocalypses around times of great persecution. This is true of John's Revelation in the Bible, as is true for the Apocalypse of Peter.
In the 2nd century, many Christians believed the Apocalypse of Peter was spiritually inspired. Perhaps this was the reason it was seriously considered for inclusion in the New Testament.
When Eusebius talks about the books that are accepted, disputed, and rejected, in the disputed columns, in other words, ones that could go in or out, he puts the Apocalypse of Peter and admits it was very, very popular. In fact, he has more doubts about the Apocalypse of John, which is the one in our New Testament we call the Book of Revelation. He's very unsure about that. But the Apocalypse of Peter is really one he seriously considers.
Peter's Apocalypse graphically describes the classes of sinners and their sins, their punishment, and the salvation of the righteous.
It gives a revelation of what hell looks like in gruesome detail. It's like looking at one of those medieval paintings. A If you're a blasphemer, you're hung up by your tongue. If you're a fornicator, you are hung up by the appropriate male appendage.
We have people hanging by their hair, fornicators, people who are sexually attractive. We have people, usurers, being punished in their particular way. I believe they're up to their knees in filth, and various other things, blasphemers. And we also have, very specific to the Apocalypse of Peter, people who are being punished who testify against martyrs, who are people who led to the martyrdom of individuals, no doubt, in the community of the author of the Apocalypse of Peter.
Peter's Apocalypse suggests there is a way out of punishment for evildoers. Perhaps it was this idea that led to its exclusion from the Holy Canon.
One idea in there, that after hell and heaven are established and there's a perfect world, if those in heaven look down and see hell and the evil one suffering there, and they ask God for universal redemption, to take everyone out of hell, they will get it. Now, this is an extraordinary idea. Peter, in the story, asks Jesus about this. Why are there so many people suffering down? He's very worried. He can't accept it. He can't be sort of vengeful and say, well, they had it coming to them. So he wants to know, how can this be? You've got a merciful, forgiving God, and these people for all eternity in hell? And Jesus says, well, it's like a secret. I'll tell you the answer, but you can't tell anyone. The answer is they will all get out. But don't tell anyone, because they'll just commit more sins. That's a forbidden idea, not just a forbidden book. It's a forbidden idea, because if you were to tell people they could get out of hell, then everyone's going to say, well, you can do whatever you want.
There was a second Apocalypse of Peter, a Gnostic text that contained yet another scenario of the end times. But, being Gnostic, it bore the stamp of heresy, and therefore was forbidden.
He calls bishops and deacons dry canals, and he's trying to stake out authority for the Gnostic movement. But the greatest feature of the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter is this description of the death of Jesus, in which a human body is being crucified, but the real Christ is standing off to the side, laughing and mocking at this attempt to kill the Son of God, when of course in Gnostic ideology the real Son of God never was human.
In fact, many other popular writings, like the life of Adam and Eve, the Book of Enoch, and the Infancy Gospels, were never seriously considered for inclusion in the Holy Bible. They are but a sampling of the hundreds more that are known today. Perhaps there are still more yet to be found. Possibly another ancient scroll lying undisturbed in a Holy Land cave, a book buried in the hot, dry sands of North Africa, a manuscript lost in a dusty stack of books somewhere in a long-neglected library.
We have to remember that the books that we have outside the New Testament are just random. They happen to survive. There are probably dozens more, hundreds more that are gone forever.
The Gnostic texts are finally coming to the attention of people. They were texts that were hidden away, they were buried in the sands of Egypt. There are Greco-Roman and Jewish and Christian, Islamic, Cathar materials all together in these texts.
I think when we only have the canon to work with, we tend to see early Christianity very, very narrowly. And the reality is, when we go back and we look at just this amazing variety of texts, that we understand that people had various different ways of looking at who Jesus was, what his relationship to God was, what his relationship to the individual believer was. And that, to me, is the tremendous loss of only having a select few books which have traveled through history in the canon.